take it away. You
Awesome.
ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
So thank you. That's a great introduction, and I'm glad you guys met David. So I've been thinking about this talk, and I've been pretty excited for a couple of reasons. One is because I want to try and recruit as many of you as possible to work on this project. I'm sure you get this a lot. But so please let your mind run free with ideas of how you could engage.
Yeah.
But also, the idea of design for social innovation is really precisely what the climate mobilization and the Pledge to Mobilize is about. And except I might say social transformation rather than innovation. But it's very much along those lines. My background is in clinical psychology. I earned my PhD about a year ago, a little bit more. But during my education, my graduate education here in New York, I went to Adelphi University on Long Island. I started to become more and more alarmed about climate change and was devoting myself in increasing amount of time and energy to that, which I'll talk a little bit more about that process. And I started writing about it online, and my approach has always been a psychological one. This is my blog, The Climate Psychologist.
That's very cool.
So I don't think this is, I mean, I think it's a bit of a difference, you know, this clinical psychology outlook, but I think a lot of the questions are the same. But I mean, my basic question, the basic driving force between developing the Pledge to Mobilize and building this organization around it is the question of kind of what are we doing? I mean, how is it that our climate is changing in a way that is going to be disastrous for us, and yet we basically act as though it is not? The majority of our life is like in this world where the climate's not changing. Before I continue, I have a question for you guys, and I was going to ask people to raise their hands, but now I think we can do levels. I like this idea. So I'm very curious. This is not a test. I'm very curious to what, when you guys hear me say climate change threatens to cause the collapse of civilization within this century, does that sound like, yes, absolutely, I don't know, or like, that's crazy? That's fascinating.
Wow, that's amazing.
All right, so thank you. I see a lot of the hands up. I actually would kind of, again, I do not mean to, I don't want to, like, kind of call anybody out, but the people, anyone who thinks that's crazy, could I just see from, and I'm totally used to being called crazy. It comes with the territory. It's just, I'm comfortable with it. So, okay, all right. So, oh, little nuts? No?
Well, I mean, I believe you.
Yeah.
But it's still hard to comprehend.
Fathom.
And that's why it's still crazy.
Yeah, right.
Wow, right.
Right, it's true and crazy.
It's true and crazy, but I don't completely understand it.
Okay.
No matter how much I've read about it. I don't understand what 100 years from now would actually be like.
Yeah, well, so, okay, that's great. I really appreciate the comment. And I'm going to run through our kind of basic, why is climate change going to cause the collapse of civilization if we don't stop it? Just because, basically, I think it's an important enough topic that we don't talk about so much, that it's worth it, even if you're on board, it's worth it to just, like, hear the words and, yeah. So, but, I mean, God, it's so incredible. I'm glad to hear, like, yes, well, again, it's a confusing thing. Am I glad? But yes, I am. That people get what's going on. And I'm not totally surprised, because, I mean, really, in the work that I do with the climate mobilization and talking about the collapse of civilization, with people like, I mean, you know, whatever, scientists and people in the field, but also, you know, the barista at Starbucks, the bank teller who I'm trying to work out, you know, the Climate Mobilization's bank account. They say things like, "Oh yeah, we are in deep trouble, aren't we?" I mean, like this knowledge is out there, and so it's again this disconnect between what we all know somewhere, and how we're living our lives. And so that was the psychological question that I kind of came at this with, and of course with the ultimate goal of trying to, you know, through understanding, be able to design some kind of intervention, you know, to think of it in psychological terms. On an individual level, you could say, what should a therapist do if the patient is dying? You know, they're sick and they're dying, or they're suicidal, or whatever, but they can't look at it, right? And that's really like kind of the core of what being a therapist is trying to help people engage with things that are really easier to walk away from, right? That there's so much force saying no, don't look at it. So yeah, that's the social innovation, the social transformation that it's like, what would life look like? What would our daily lives look like if we acted as though climate change were going to cause the collapse of civilization? Like, what would happen if we actually took that knowledge in and allowed it to impact our lives? As there was a very cool project some years ago where the project was cool, but I really liked the slogan. It was called the Man-Palo Project, and they said, "Get informed and let it change you," right? And Pope Francis recently said in the encyclical Laudato Si, which I highly recommend reading. I read that encyclical and I thought, wow, this would be a tremendous book if it was written by a no-name author, right? This is just a good book, and then it just happens to be written by, you know, the person alive with the most moral and institutional authority. But Pope Francis said, this is a paraphrase, "Our job is not to be intellectually aware of these problems, but to make the suffering of the world our own personal suffering, and in doing so, ask ourselves what we might do about it."
Yes.
So to take it in, and it's so painful. I mean, it's for me one of the hard things, and why I'm glad that people raise their hands, is that it's kind of like, you know, I'm like the bearer of bad news, right? Like, maybe people don't want to hang out with me so much, right? Because I'm always talking about the collapse of civilization. But what happens when we welcome that? When we actually say, yes, suffering of the world, come into my life. So anyway, this is all a preface about how I approach this work, and I can tell you. So in terms of my like biography and how I came to this, I can say there were two critical challenges issued to me by people close to me. As I was in my PhD program and learning how to become a therapist, I was also in my own personal therapy, and I was starting to talk a lot about, you know, my climate worries. And my therapist said to me one day, she said, you know, you worry about climate change a lot, but you don't know much. And I was like, wow, okay, that's harsh, right? I mean, but it was true, actually. My impressions were very formed through, you know, a headline or whatever. I mean, it's just vague. I didn't know much, and I tried to keep it that way, really, because it's painful information. So she made that challenge, and I started to read a lot of books about climate change. And unfortunately, I can tell you, I never read a single thing that made me say, oh, calm down, you're worried over nothing, it's not that bad, right? Everything, if you start reading about climate change, you go down that rabbit hole, it's really bad. I mean, I'll get to a little bit of specifics shortly. So I thought, okay, I'll start a blog. I'm an academic, I like to write, I've got, ideas, things to say, whatever, I'll start a blog. And then came a challenge from a very politically savvy friend of mine who said, who I wanted to talk to about this blog, and he said, don't start a blog, discourse isn't enough, think, what could you do, what could we do together that could actually solve this? And that really is the challenge that launched the entire project. I can literally say my life has not been the same since, because I mean that's not like the realm in which I had ever allowed myself to imagine, right? That I could do something that big. No, that's crazy, right? Live in a realistic, have realistic goals, not world-saving goals. But once the gauntlet had been thrown once again, I then started another round of research, but this time it was about denial and about social movements and how they happen. And just what is happening that that the climate is changing and like nobody talks about it. I mean, how many times did you talk about climate change today? Right? Like it's not commensurate with the scope of the problem. Very quickly in our process, we started to think about a pledge because well, at first we thought, okay, a political party. We'll be a single issue political party. We'll call it the Human Survival Party, and we'll just say, like, we have one agenda, right? But making a political party, very complicated, time-intensive task. And we said, well, you look at Grover Norquist, and he's been basically able to capture the entire Republican Party, their entire agenda, by getting the candidates and elected officials to sign a pledge. They say they won't raise taxes, and then he holds them to it, and then they don't. And so that seemed like a good strategy. So the pledge to mobilize. This is the actual text on the website. But I'll take you. It's not the greatest. Like to scroll all the way through. So I'll take you to this PowerPoint description of it. The pledge to mobilize is a excuse me. It is a political platform and a set of commitments. The political platform. I'm sorry. This is okay. The political platform is 5 points. I call on the United States federal government to commence a social and economic mobilization to restore a climate that is safe, stable, and supportive of human civilization. This heroic campaign shall be carried out on the scale of the American World War II home front mobilization and will require hard work and shared sacrifice from all Americans. Number 2, reduce our country's net greenhouse gas emissions 100% by 2025 and implement far-reaching measures to remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. Enlist tens of millions of Americans in this effort. Full employment will be achieved. I'm paraphrasing now. Conduct this mobilization in accordance with the Constitution and ensure the essential needs of the civilian economy are met, and establish the following as our nation's top foreign policy priorities: a 100% reduction of global net greenhouse gas emissions at wartime speed, and the deployment of comprehensive measures that remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere until a safe climate is restored. So that's the political platform. It's pretty straightforward. I have in my email signature, it says, climate change is an emergency, let's treat it like one. Let's mobilize. World War II is the historical example in the United States when we faced a true crisis. And we said, well, if we don't win this war, we're not going to accomplish any of our other goals, so we're going to put everything, we're going to direct all of the economy, all of our government, all of our citizens towards this goal. And we won, but I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Can I just stop for a second? When I first heard this, or when somebody first made the comment to me about World War II, about bringing World War II into the picture,
Yep.
That was really helpful to me because I think there was sort of a sense that, like, this is impossible.
Right.
this isn't possible, but there is a precedent. You know, and I would actually, when we discuss, I'd love to hear people from other countries. I mean, this is an American reference, and also Great Britain after World War II. But yeah, I mean, there are precedents in human history when this level of engagement has been achieved. It is possible.
Yeah, there's so much to say, but so let me say the next part of the pledge, and then I'll address this with it. So that's the political platform that I just laid out, and then there's a set of personal and political commitments when you take this pledge. So I will vote for candidates on every electoral level who have signed the pledge to mobilize over those who have not. So, you know, city council, Congress, president, anyone. I will devote time, money, or both to elected officials and candidates who have signed this pledge, and I will mobilize my skills, resources, and networks to spread the truth of climate change and the hope of this movement to others. When I spread the pledge to mobilize, I will do so with respect, truth, focus, and courage. So it's, you know, this is a one-page document, but there's a lot contained in it, right? There's a whole political platform, and actually even before that, up at the top, there's an acknowledgement that climate change threatens to cause the collapse of civilization and the natural world within this century. Then there's a whole political platform which calls for just the most transformation. I mean, it's like, you know, we want to get off fossil fuels as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. That's the idea. And then a set of political commitments. And as Skylar pointed out, one of the big, the big thing that I found in my research about denial is about helplessness versus empowerment, let's say. That climate change, people don't think about climate change, they don't talk about climate change, they don't act on climate change because they don't think they can do anything. It seems just like, and this was me too, and this was why my friend's challenge was so mind-blowing, right? Because it's the whole globe, it's our entire energy system and agricultural system, and we're all just one person. So, you know, and there's so much messaging, really unfortunate messaging, I would say, coming out of a lot of environmental communication that says, oh my God, the climate is changing, turn off your lights, you know, or something like that. You should change your individual consumption decisions because of the climate. And that is obviously insufficient, obviously, right? I mean, it doesn't pass the smell test. Mm-hmm. So the Pledge to Mobilize is really built in as many ways as we could think of to fight this sense of helplessness and say, we can do this. We as humans can do this. We as Americans can do this. The pledge, we're focused in America, but we do have international. Because we've done it before. We have, the such thing as a national emergency mobilization has been executed successfully before. And then with this I will section, the idea being, you know, not to say that this strategy of spreading the word and committing to candidates, not to say at all that it's easy or it's, yeah, I mean, obviously it's not, but it could work, right? I mean, if hundreds of thousands and then millions, if we got in the news and let's say Mark O'Malley took the pledge to mobilize, we think he's the most likely Democrat to do it because he's really got to do something to get his campaign going. So and if we started to have presidential candidates actually talking about this, if we do it, it is an imaginable solution. And though it's still very hard, that's a pretty big step, right? From going from, I literally cannot imagine how humanity and this country could turn around the trajectory that we're on, which is how I felt about climate change, how I think most people feel. I mean, just like, you know, and you hear a lot of cynicism, right? We're fucked. People say that a lot. A lot of, you know, well, humans must not be that good anyway, right, if we're doing this. And so the idea of a vision of what could be accomplished, that is, and how, a vision of what could be accomplished and how I, right, the signer, could make a meaningful contribution, that is absolutely central. So rather than change your individual consumption patterns, we say mobilize your skills, resources, and networks to spread the truth of climate change and the hope of this movement to others. Meaning, talk to your friends about it. Talk to your coworkers, your family, your fellow students, right? You can work within your sphere of influence towards a national and international solution. You do not have to limit your actions to consumption. We can be citizens. I'm aware of the time. What should I talk about? Should I talk about the kind of the intellectual foundation of this, meaning what is happening, why is civilization going to collapse, and what a World War II scale climate mobilization would look like? Or should I talk about how the organization is doing and what's going on there? How about, between those two things, could we get a vote? Like, intellectual foundation, let's hear it, versus that'll be the first option. How the organization is doing is second option. Intellectual foundation.
Start with the first.
Okay, just do it all. Okay, and how about second, organizational, what's going on there? Oh, that is a split decision.
Yeah, it sure is.
Okay, so I'm gonna take the gentleman's advice and talk a little bit about both. So this is a slide presentation that's available for anyone to give about the climate mobilization. This is not customized for this class. This is just like the introduction to the climate mobilization and the pledge to mobilize. So it starts with this history of World War II, because we wanna try and get people in the mindset of being able to succeed over long odds before we level with them about how messed up this situation is. So I learned a lot of World War II history for this project that you might be interested in. So when the United States entered the war, we were way behind, like way behind, because after World War I, the United States was like, this, war is horrible. We're shutting down our production facilities. We've just had enough. No more foreign wars. And so we downsized the military tremendously. And yet in Germany, after World War I, they rebuilt all of their military production capacity and so it was all new, right? They were pioneering new forms of warfare, and the other Axis powers also, but particularly Germany. So, one anecdote that I find particularly illuminating is, as late as 1940, the dominant strain of thought in the United States military was that horses were superior to tanks because they don't have to be refueled. Okay, you can cut your supply lines if you just use horses. So we were just not with the program of mechanized warfare that Germany and the Axis powers were about to show us is actually just, takes war to a totally different level. But following Pearl Harbor, America mobilized for total victory. This is an important parallel too. Before Pearl Harbor, we were in denial, right? Just like we are now. All this history says American was isolationist. We said, we're not threatened, it's not our problem, stay out of it, whatever, it's not that bad. All kinds of denials, psychological mechanisms for denial. But once we mobilized, once we got in gear, war production skyrocketed, as did, the amount of change in our society during the mobilization really cannot be overstated. 10% of Americans relocated to a new state to work a war job. People worked in new jobs, sometimes women going to work for the very first time. 40% of vegetables were grown at home during World War II in victory gardens. So in terms of policy, federal spending skyrocketed, there were strong regulations, and the consumer economy was scaled back, i.e. rationing, right? Gas, tires, meat, sugar, nylons, I mean, this was all rationed. For fair shares. There was huge participation, and of course, as we know, America won the war, the Allies won the war. We had the largest economic boom in history. We achieved full employment and had gains in equality in both racial and gender, and there were technological breakthroughs in every field. The most notable being the Manhattan Project, the production of the atomic bomb. Obviously, this is a very morally dubious achievement, but it is not a scientifically dubious achievement, right? That is a huge technological breakthrough that was only possible because we had multiple governments saying, this is our top priority. We will make the impossible possible. So in this presentation, after we explain that mobilization can occur, we then start talking about the collapse of civilization. You can find a lot of quotes like this of scientists talking about the collapse of civilization. They say, Lonnie Thompson says, climatologists, like other scientists, tend to be a stolid group, not given to theatrical rantings about falling skies. Why then are climatologists speaking about the danger of global warming? The answer is virtually all of us are now convinced that global warming poses a clear and present danger to civilization. I am not going to go through the basics of how climate change happens, or I mean, I guess, okay, it's warming. It's warming the atmosphere. Carbon emissions and greenhouse gas, they keep more energy in. But the fact is that warming, a small amount of warming, I mean, I remember in college thinking, 2 degrees? I mean, seriously, I'm supposed to care? Like, this is not a large amount of warming. But it turns out that making even a small change in something as fundamental as the temperature, the global temperature system, messes everything up. I mean, like hydraulic cycles, particularly rain and drought. Okay, so we've experienced 0.85 degrees Celsius of warming so far, and we are already outside. We are already warmer than we've ever been during human civilization, and we are on track for much more warming, 4 degrees or more. Where climate changes are already killing 400,000 people a year. The Pentagon says it's posing immediate risks to national security, and we're nearing tipping points. I mean, to make a connection that doesn't get made nearly enough is, so all these things are happening like scientifically, it's warming, we've got change in rain cycles, but how does this like kind of come home, right? And I think this is like really very, very important. Drought, the biggest problem is drought. The biggest problem of climate is drought. That drought causing, I mean, there's many other problems, but drought causing agricultural failure, causing state failure. That is the basic way in which climate change is causing the collapse of civilization. It's already happened in Syria and in several other failed states. But take Syria for a very current example. They had the worst drought in their history. Food prices went way, way up. The farmers relocated to the cities because they couldn't sustain themselves on their farm. And so in a situation like that, when people are hungry, they're displaced, is it any surprise that you get a civil war? Of course not. This is predictable, right? When the basic conditions of what humanity needs to live, food and water and shelter and protection from the elements, when that is not available, of course there's chaos. I mean, it brings out the worst in people. Right? I mean, the genocides in Rwanda and Darfur were also linked to ecological stresses. So that's how it happens. I mean, yeah, the basic issue is drought leading to state failure. Of course, you've also got severe weather and tropical diseases and all kinds of other impacts, nasty impacts, complicating things. But yeah, we Sao Paulo has almost run out of water, and California is running out of water, and of course, there are also drought conditions are causing wildfires. So it's really, I mean, yeah. I talked about that. And the emissions, so this is happening, we know it's gonna cause the collapse of civilization, and yet we are on the worst case emissions trajectory. The UN, the countries, the various countries of the world have not been able to do anything meaningful about this for decades. So, okay, that's, yeah, the UK Met Office says the worst case is 4-degree rise by 2060, which is, many scientists tell us, is not compatible with civilization, organized civilization. So, how old will you be in 2060? So, the answer is, not so old that you shouldn't care. Right? This is happening to us. One thing I say to people is what I'm trying to convince you of is that climate change is the most important thing that is happening in your life, right? That it's happening to you and me and my family and your family. Yeah, let's take questions.
Or comments.
Yeah, or comments, sure.
It's a lot to stomach, I know.